You can just look at them and tell which one tastes better. So big taste difference between. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. It is Wednesday, June 11th here in South Georgia, and yesterday we wrapped up our 2025 tater harvest. The boys finished digging the last row in our in-ground plot. So here's our entire 2025 tater harvest here. You saw me dig those smaller quantities from the raised bed a few videos ago. The in-ground plot did really well. Got a solid harvest of Huckleberry Gold, and the Baltic Rose really showed out. More about those in a minute. And so as I was putting those taters under the barn and thinking about those varieties that we like to grow, I got to thinking about what I thought would be a pretty good video topic for today. So in today's video, we're going to discuss whether variety really matters. And let me set the stage for this a little bit. So if you look at a seed catalog, or go to a local store and look at the seed rack, or go online to your favorite seed website, you can easily get quickly overwhelmed by all the choices. So let's use yellow squash as an example. You might see some really cheap seed, you might see some relatively expensive seed, you might see some that's kind of in the middle. How do you know whether you should go with that expensive seed or you'd be just fine getting the cheap stuff? And I'm going to move this underneath the barn here so we don't hear as much of that racket going on across the road. But we'll go through some examples. I think I've got about 10 different veggies we'll go through and talk about for each of those whether I think it's worth it or not to go with the more expensive seed. And in talking about all these, we're going to discuss two very important factors for backyard gardeners: taste or flavor and production. And this will be fairly relative to my climate down here in South Georgia, but I think this information will be helpful for everyone across the country. And as much as we can, we're going to try to compare apples to apples here. So we're not comparing a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin, for example, to a pie pumpkin. We're going to try to keep it apples to apples. So number one on our list, let's talk about potatoes. Now, production-wise, I don't think variety really matters that much. I can get pretty decent yields no matter what variety of potato I grow. Some do yield more than others some years, but it's usually pretty close. I don't think variety matters that much as far as production goes with potatoes. However, in my opinion, taste does matter a good bit. From one variety to the next, you can get a lot more flavor, a lot higher quality tater. Let's take these two right here, for example. So this plain old red tater right here with kind of a white inside is not going to taste near as good as this Baltic Rose tater with that nice yellow inside right there. You can just look at them and tell which one tastes better. So big taste difference between these two right here. This seed is considerably more expensive, but it does taste a lot better. Now, if you're just trying to put food on the table, a gourmet tater like this may not be that important to you. Red taters may be just fine. But if you want something that has a really good taste, you may be willing to spend a little extra money to get a really good tasting tater. Number two on our list, let's talk about tomatoes. And this is kind of the inverse of what we just talked about with potatoes, because with tomatoes, those cheaper heirloom varieties tend to have a lot more flavor than the hybrid varieties do. Now that gap is narrowing a little bit in, say, the last decade, but your cheaper seeds are going to usually provide more flavorful tomatoes. So with tomatoes, you're not going to buy a more expensive seed to seek out greater taste or flavor, but you may want to buy a more expensive seed to seek out better production. Because there is a considerable difference, especially down here for us, especially for those that live in tough climates. There's a considerable difference in the production of hybrids versus heirloom tomato varieties. Those hybrids are tougher, they're more vigorous, they can withstand heat, humidity, disease pressure a lot better than the heirlooms do. So if you really need that consistent production, it may be worth it to buy those more expensive seeds. Number three on our list, let's talk about peppers. Now, as far as taste goes, I don't think variety really matters. An open pollinated or heirloom variety of poblano peppers is going to taste just the same as this hybrid barren poblano here. just like bell peppers. A bell pepper is a bell pepper. An heirloom open pollinated bell pepper is going to taste the same as a hybrid bell pepper. However, there is a decent difference in the production you usually get from a hybrid pepper versus an open pollinated pepper. The hybrid peppers usually really load up, the fruits are really consistent, and I can usually get a longer harvest window or production window out of them. But the question to ask yourself is, how many peppers do you actually need? Most people only need just a few pepper plants, but if you're making sauces with them, making your own hot sauce, or you're preserving them in some way, you may want those more expensive hybrids that are going to really load up for you and give you a lot of peppers at one time. Number 4 on our list, let's talk about squash. Much like peppers, not a whole lot of taste difference between an open pollinated cheap squash variety and a hybrid squash variety. If you were to find an open pollinated straight neck squash, it's probably going to taste exactly the same as this hybrid enterprise squash here does. So taste doesn't really vary that much amongst squash varieties, but production will vary and plant vigor will vary. The hybrid varieties tend to have a little more vigor, tend to be more disease resistant, more able to push through tough conditions, which usually gives you a longer harvesting window. The plants stick around for a little bit longer, and you might get more squash per harvest. And that could be beneficial if you are limited on garden space. Squash plants can get pretty big. If you got a small garden, you can't have a whole lot of squash plants in there. So you would want those few squash plants you have to be as productive as possible. You might want to spend the extra money for a hybrid seed so you could get that. Moving on to number 5 on our list, which is cucumbers. Much like the squash and the peppers, not going to be a whole lot of taste difference between an open pollinated pickling cucumber and this one right here. If you grow a variety, say like Boston pickling cucumber, it's going to taste the same as this Supermax cucumber right here. However, if I plant just a 10-foot row of Boston pickling and I plant just a 10-foot row of Supermax here, I'm going to get a lot more of these. This variety is a lot more productive than an heirloom pickling variety. Done a lot of testing with that over the years. When we started out around here, we were growing a lot of Boston pickling, and now I only grow these hybrid varieties because I get so many more cucumbers at one time, which is very important if you're wanting to make some pickles. You need a lot of cucumbers at one time. You don't need just a few here and there. And in my case, down here in South Georgia, where we can do successions of cucumber plantings, for example, I've got some coming up right now. They're just about this tall that will give us some production once these are done. With a hybrid, a more expensive seed, I can manage with just 2 plantings of cucumbers. With a open pollinated variety that may, start to suffer a little bit in the heat, humidity, and the disease pressure, I might have to do 3 plantings to get as many cucumbers. So the longevity of the plants keeps me from having to plant as many times. Number 6 on our list would be watermelon. And I don't have any watermelons to show you right now because mine haven't started producing yet. But as far as watermelons go, I think taste does matter. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say that the old-timey watermelon varieties were sweeter, but they're comparing what them and their grandpa grew in their backyard garden to what commercial melons they might find at the grocery store, which really isn't a fair comparison. But I can tell you that the watermelon breeding has selected for sweeter watermelon. Some of these newer hybrid varieties just make a sweeter melon when picked at peak ripeness, just make a sweeter watermelon than some of the older varieties do. So in my opinion, taste matters with watermelons. Take, for example, that tender sweet orange variety I've got out there growing right now. I've grown it in the past. It's okay, but I know it isn't near as sweet as that orange crisp seedless variety I have also grown in the past. Big price difference between those seeds. Might not be worth it for you, but it's worth noting there is a difference there. You are getting a lot better tasting melon with those more expensive seeds. Production is also going to matter when it comes to watermelon. Production and fruit consistency. The more expensive watermelon seeds are usually going to give you some better looking melons, more consistent looking melons across your watermelon plot. Whereas with the open pollinated varieties, you'll get some nice ones, but oftentimes you will get some wonky looking ones too. Number 7 on our list would be pumpkins. And as far as taste goes, when we're comparing apples to apples, I don't really think taste matters when it comes to pumpkins. Take, for example, a blue pumpkin like Gerardale. That's the open pollinated version. Compare that to the hybrid version, which I think is called Blue Doll. Those are probably going to taste exactly the same. However, that hybrid blue pumpkin is going to outproduce that heirloom blue pumpkin, give you a lot more pumpkins per square foot of growing space. Also, those hybrids tend to be a little more disease resistant, may stick around a little longer, just may perform better overall, but not going to be any taste difference between the two. Number 8 on our list is okra. Now, I know some people will argue with me here, but I don't think taste really matters when it comes to okra. If you were to blindfold me, do a blind taste test, cut up okra that were all similar size pieces, I don't think I could tell a difference between the varieties. I know some people will say some varieties are more slimy than others, but I'm pretty sure I couldn't tell the difference. In my opinion, okra tastes like okra. And I don't think production with okra really matters that much either. Yes, there are some varieties that are higher yielding than others, but how many okra plants do you actually need? Now, if you're growing okra to sell, yeah, you're probably going to want to spend some money on some hybrids that are going to give you maximal production. But for a backyard gardener that's just growing okra for their family, just a few okra plants will give you all the okra you want to eat. Now, that variety we grow, the dwarf cowhorn, I like it because it stays tender at longer lengths, but that's really not an heirloom or a hybrid thing in my opinion. So if you're a market farmer, spend a little extra money on some hybrid okra seeds may be worth it. But for a backyard gardener, heck, I can grow a heap of heirloom open pollinated okra and just a little 4x6 raised bed. Number 9 on our list is onions, and I think this is the only cool season veggie on this list. Maybe we should do another list in the fall once the cool season gardening rolls around. But as far as taste or flavor goes, I don't think it varies that much between an open pollinated variety and a hybrid variety. If you ever take one of those old school round short day sweet onions and grow it side by side with this Timon sweet onion here, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference in the taste. They would taste the same. But as far as production goes, the hybrids do tend to be more consistent, have a little more maximum potential as far as size goes. They also are less likely to bolt or go to seed, which means they will inevitably store longer. So if you're looking for bigger, consistent onions that aren't going to bolt early on you, you may want to spend a little extra money on the hybrid varieties. Number 10 on our list would be beans. Now, I don't grow a whole lot of beans, but I can tell you really no taste difference between an open pollinated green bean variety and a hybrid green bean variety, or an open pollinated lima bean variety versus a hybrid lima bean variety. They're going to taste pretty much the same. And production wise, I don't think there is a whole lot of variance either. We can get some pretty dang good production out of some heirloom climbing lima bean varieties. Now, if you're just talking about bush beans or snap beans, you may see some production differences between the open pollinated version and the hybrid version. The hybrid version may be a little more productive, but in general with beans overall, I don't see a big gap there. So that's my opinion, and feel free to disagree with me in the comments below. But as you can see there, with some vegetables, spending more money on seeds is going to give you better flavor, like with these potatoes here. In other cases, spending more money on seeds is going to mean you compromise flavor, like with the tomatoes. And in other cases, it's really not going to matter as far as flavor goes, but there will be differences in production. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you like to go with the more expensive hybrid seeds, or you rather just plant the cheaper open pollinated seeds. We do a little bit of both around here. It's not like we're all in one way or the other. And if you're interested in knowing more about the different types of cucumbers out there, since I know a lot of people are picking cucumbers right now, watch this video right here. We'll go through some of the verbiage out there you'll see on cucumber seed sites and help explain what all that means. So check that out. We'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.